This spring, I used my drawing calendar as a small experiment. 92 days, one tiny square for each day, to see if drawing my life could make the season feel less like a blur. Spring always feels like it will last longer than it does. And then, suddenly, it's gone. There is this idea that as we get older, time feels faster, because each new day becomes a smaller part of everything you have already lived. And I've been feeling it more and more with each passing year. But I think time also flies even faster when days start to look too similar, when we stop noticing them. So, I wanted to see if one tiny drawing a day could make this spring a little harder to lose. And by the end, I realized that the most meaningful squares weren't always the most obvious ones. My spring didn't start in my normal routine. It started while I was still in Thailand. So the first week of the season stayed clearly in my memory as a bright, dynamic time, full of impressions that were quite easy to remember. So many wonderful things happened, but one of my favorite memories from that first week was much smaller. It was a table. A gorgeous ceramic table in a restaurant waiting area, covered with a vintage porcelain-style landscape pattern. It wasn't the main event of the day, but I couldn't stop looking at it. And in the calendar, it became the main memory of that square. With a bit of space left for the work tasks I also had that day. And I think this is what I like about this project. It keeps not only the obvious memories, but also the strange little details that somehow catch your attention. The flight back home felt like a transition from the intense rhythm of travel into something much calmer. Opening the calendar again at my own desk felt a little surreal after a month away. Everything was familiar, but for a moment it felt new again. My table, my cup, the quiet sounds of the apartment. Returning to routine didn't feel boring at all. It felt exciting. It also felt special because we returned to Milan right when spring was starting to bloom, with trees and plants waking up everywhere. And for a while, I couldn't stop drawing flowers. But besides that, life became much quieter. The days were mostly filled with normal responsibilities, work, errands, small routines, and repetitive things that tend to blend together in memory over time. And I cherish this part of my life too. I love the everyday structure I was able to build, because routine quietly supports everything else. I don't want these ordinary days to fade from memory, just because they're not eventful. This is where the calendar helped the most. It saved the days that usually disappear first, the normal ones. Mostly, they were really just work days. Like this one. At first glance, nothing particularly exciting happened. I spent most of the day working on the product flow and took a short walk after lunch. But a beautiful blooming tree in the park and a delicious strawberry made this day feel special, and especially spring-like. And somehow, these small details mattered just as much as that gorgeous ceramic table in Thailand. Or this day, when I was working on a new landing page. There were no big events or special plans, but I was excited about the work itself, about building something important and visually rich. And I think that can be more than enough for a day to be good. Of course, ordinary life also had rough edges. There were days when I felt overloaded with work, when long product flows and deadlines stretched across 2 days in a row, leaving almost no space for anything else. And there were days that were just uncomfortable. A toothache, an urgent dentist appointment, and the feeling of simply getting through the day. But those days were part of spring too. The calendar didn't only keep the beautiful parts. It kept the whole texture of the season. The warm days, the repetitive days, the difficult days, and the quiet ones in between. They may not be the prettiest parts of the calendar, but they are part of life as it actually is. Spring wasn't only made of quiet work days. Some days became much fuller, and finding highlights didn't require any effort, especially on weekends, when it felt easier to notice the season. One Saturday we went to Lake Garda to visit the eccentric estate of Gabriele D'Annunzio, one of Italy's most controversial cultural figures. The villa's west grounds had a distinct early spring feeling. In the calendar, I chose to keep the facade, because that was the detail that stayed with me the most. It definitely stood out among everything else I saw that day. Another time I especially enjoyed this season was during a hiking day with friends. In the middle of the hike, we were rewarded with a delicious lunch at a countryside restaurant. I did my best to fit all of that into one tiny square. Almost naturally, the amount of nature kept growing, until one weekend we went to the Dolomites. For a few days, everything felt much bigger. The mountains, the air, the views, and the endless beauty of the place. These were the kind of days that were obviously easy to remember. The impressions were larger, clearer, and more intense. But in the calendar, they still had the same square as everything else. And I like that. The calendar doesn't rank days. On the page, it makes all things in life feel equally important, whether the moment is big or small. After the quietness of nature, April brought me back into the city in the loudest possible way. I visited Milan Design Week for the first time. There was almost too much to take in. So many different spaces, objects, ideas, and long, tiring queues. I managed to go to the city center a few times during this week and visit a few interesting exhibitions. The first thing I chose to draw was the entrance to the Skoda installation. Seeing such a strange, playful object in the middle of the urban environment felt a bit surreal. And I wanted to keep that exact moment in the calendar. I was also captivated by a deconstructed yurt from the Uzbek contemporary design exhibition When Apricots Blossom. It felt like a beautiful way to combine traditional craftsmanship with contemporary art. Milan Design Week was inspiring, but also a little overwhelming. So for those days, the calendar became a way to keep one small piece from each experience. By the end of the season, spring started to feel like it was slipping away. Partly because May became very practical. On top of my usual workload, there was important paperwork and bureaucratic tasks that took up a lot of mental space. Eventually, a few squares were filled with different papers and documents I remembered too well. The month also turned out to be rainy and gloomy, which was honestly fine with me, because I had a lot to do and spent most of my time at home anyway. The days were warmer, but also faster and a little harder to separate from each other. Still, there were a few pockets of warmth. One weekend, we hosted my friend who came from the US. We saw each other in person for the first time. Those 2 days felt really special and memorable. And another rainy day, we had guests over, and my husband cooked a traditional Moldavian meal. These moments didn't make the month less blurry, but they gave it small anchors. A few clear memories inside a period that otherwise felt blurry. And this is usually what happens to me. A whole month passes and I remember 2 or 3 big things. But the texture of ordinary days fades. This time I had a small record of it. Looking at these 3 months together, I can see the spring taking shape in a way it usually doesn't. And the squares are all different from each other, just like the days themselves. Some squares are bright and full, some are quiet and simple. But together, they definitely hold the feeling of the season. They bring back small details I probably would have lost without drawing them. This practice didn't make time stop. The days are still moving faster and faster. But it gave me a reason to slow down for a few minutes and look at the day again. And even though I forget things easily, one small drawing can bring the day back. Not completely, but enough. A place, a mood, a piece of work, something I ate, something I noticed. And that is what feels valuable to me in this project. This small habit gives life a small equal place to land, before it becomes a blur. So in that sense, I think the experiment worked. I made this calendar free to download, so the link is in the description for anyone who wants to try the same format. But of course, you don't need this exact calendar to do something similar. You can find your own way. A small square in a notebook, a short note, a tiny sketch, anything that helps you notice your days a little more. Because the point is not to make polished or impressive art. The point is to give space to the fun, mundane, beautiful, tiring, and difficult moments equally. And to keep a little bit of art among all the busyness of life.